Hello, my name is Marek Tuszynski. Welcome to the second panel of CODE NL-D. We're here to talk about digital agency and the possible relationship of influence to public policy. I am a media studies scholar at the University of Amsterdam, and I will be the moderator of the discussion today between Marek Tuszynski and Sarah Grant from Tactical Tech and Cosmic.Berlin, respectively, both situated in Berlin. And so this panel will focus on the possibility of artistic interventions in relation to this broader topic. So how is it that artists might shape a dialogue around the legislative landscape in Germany and the Netherlands with policymakers and politicians to raise awareness around alternative platforms and technologies? And we have the great fortune of having these two wonderful and important artists with us today. The order will be first Marek and then Sarah. So I will now introduce Marek. He'll give a talk of 8 or 10 minutes. Then we have an opportunity to come back for very brief question, if there is one, before we move on to Sarah's talk, which will be the same length, same setup, followed by a Q&A where we will take audience questions. So those of you who are in the audience live, please bear in mind that we will have the opportunity to get to your questions at the end. So I'd like to start now by introducing Marek Tuszynski. He's the creative director and co-founder of Tactical Tech, which produces creative and social interventions that span various media, from film, radio, television, books, exhibitions, and the web. For the past 25 years, he's been working at the nexus of technology and politics, information and activism, and the consequence of living in a quantified society. Marek's done with the Tactical Tech organization a great many things, too numerous for us to mention right now in the space of time that we have. But I would suggest that you look at the very thorough report on all of the activities that Tactical Tech puts out each year to see all of the kind of impact that they have in this space. So without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to Marek.
Hi everyone. I assume I'm on right now, and I'm putting my clock on 8 minutes, and I don't know if my presentation is on. There's a few slides. Hopefully it is on. Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you very much. I'm super happy to be here. This is such a fantastic company. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm just gonna dive directly into the topics without explaining or justifying or going back into history. I may do that a little bit at the end, maybe. So 8 minutes, 8 slides, 8 images, more or less, and few stories. I start from work of Dries Reporter. Or maybe actually I start from something else. In fact, Sarah and I talk about how we're going to approach these talks, and we decided kind of organically that I focus on what an artist or a person trying to create a creative language around topics that we're dealing with can talk about, and Sarah will focus on how. So I'm just going to focus on what. And the first what we have here is the relationship between me, as Gillian said, the user, the consumer, or however you like to be called, a person that owns a mobile phone, the person that depends on technology. And we often do depend on technology, in particular if we are not necessarily representing the majority, we may be part of the minorities, where the technology is a lifeline. The mobile phone is not just the telephone, if you like, or entertainment. So me, in this sense, it's you, it's us, it's the individual person, and how we consume technology. Dresden Porter did this work called jaywalking, where you approach a kind of an industrial button, the black one on the right side here, and in front of you you see a screen, and on the screen you see a crossroad with the passage for pedestrians, and the algorithm is observing if it is red or green, and if there's somebody crossing. And if you see somebody crossing on red, you are actually invited to report. And by reporting, that means that the screenshot is going to be taken, an email, anonymous email, is going to be sent to the closest police department that will be asked to deal with this crime. Let's put it this way. And this work is based on the publicly available stream from the camera feed from closest city or the same city when the work is exhibited, and it actually works. So when you notice somebody, an algorithm is helping you to notice a person crossing on the red, then you can kind of go ahead and report them, and that creates interesting dynamic between the visitor, the viewer, the audience, and the work and the artist and the context. So you will have a lot of people kind of going around and watching from a distance what's going to happen if somebody actually will, be that person, come close and watch and report. Others come directly into it and try to break it through pressing as many times as possible and report false situations where there's nobody crossing the road. Some other people just stand in front of the big button and wait for the situation to appear. And it's very important that the visitor becomes part of the work through all these different kinds of interactions. They all kind of part of the work. This work is not only about who can see what and how the internet works, what is available there, and so on. But it has layers that are very important. So the first layer is that if you weren't there, the algorithm is designed in such a way that it sees the red light and it sees the person crossing, and it could send automatically an email. You've been given false, in a way, agency here to act. That's often how we kind of experience the way technology is being produced for us, where we have this individual, direct experience of empowerment. And I don't see there's anybody here in the public and in the audience and among speakers who would not experience that the technologies we're looking at specifically, that we interact through mobile phones and internet, etc., are immediately empowering. They enable us to do things in ways that we prefer them to be done, and so forth, etc. The other layer of this work is that is in a way illustrating the problem of moderation, the problem of the words that already been said, censorship, and who in each layer is responsible for which movement, who should act, who should do what. The moderation of Facebook is very similar. There's an operator, the moderator, who has to obey the rules of the platform and use algorithms to help to aid that person to be able to decide what goes or doesn't go, if it is reported or not, and so on. The other aspect I wanted to talk about is us, which is not me as an individual, as a group. There's no big business, no big tech business without us users, not as individuals, but as populations and any other kind of formation of a group. It's a work we've done where we try to illustrate the omnipresence and the scale and the kind of godlike qualities of Google and then Alphabet. We collected all the information about every single acquisition and every single investment from Google and Alphabet since they were established, and we mapped them in this beautiful big physical infographic, and we put it out there because we realized that when we talk to people we work with, talk about Google, we don't necessarily know what we're talking about. It's not only search engine, it's not only fantastic mapping service, it's not this and that. And this work does not illustrate something more important even that we're working on now, and it's going to be new work coming up soon, which is called Google NL, which is not only mapping this, learning from the investment and their strategies, what they're trying to develop as a complicated tool that they own, But what that allows them to do, and we go back to talk about we, the producers, the ones that are being observed and part of all the networks of Google. And you have to kind of realize that Google has right now over 10 products or platforms, if you like, that attract more than 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion. When you look at Android, that's how many people use Android. And if you start overlaying them, there's only 5.6 or 5.7 billion internet users. So you can easily imagine that majority of people who use internet these days will in some or other way through Google. And the question is, how do you show people this relationship between the free services that we get, the empowerment that we receive, the monetization process that enables Google and Alphabet to make a lot of money out of that, in the massive accumulation of knowledge or informational intelligence, if you like, that they get from that. Then I wanted to show you the next one. Okay, clicking works. This is work that we're going to be showing in July. It's not yet online, which is called The Technologies of Hope, 100 Pandemics Technologies. We have a database of almost 300 different kinds of solutions that respond to pandemic, and not only in terms of tracking and vaccines and so on, but look at the different kind of aspects. And we divided them into 4 categories and so on. And you're welcome to explore them. We can talk about categories. We tried not to use technological categories, but for us, the important thing is the normalization of intelligence gathering by different entities that would enable different services to respond to crisis, to predict crisis, to act in the name of care and a kind of protection. The slide you're looking at is actually a Dutch company called Kepler Vision Technologies that enables monitoring of elderly people, and those who monitor them or need to monitor them in their house, etc., automatically inform about different conditions that they experience. And for us, it's very important that that kind of a piece of work, and my 8 minutes is over, so I'm using my 2 extra minutes to make it 10, is the normalization of certain things, is what I call the future is basically tomorrow, or if not, next hour. And it's already here. When you talk about smart cities, they are not the fantastic urban structure somewhere in Asia that we don't know where it is, or in Toronto maybe, but they are in Berlin, they are in Amsterdam, and so on. And those are these invisible layers of hundreds and hundreds of technologies that normalize certain ways of us collecting not only data, which is complicated word data, because it has no really meaning to the public, and it's important for artists to kind of try to find other vocabulary and other metaphors. And the last slide I wanted to show you, you should read this article from ProPublica that came out a couple of days ago, investigation into Peter Thiel. Because when we talk about policy making and so on, we don't have to only look at regulating technology companies, how they operate, what their work conditions are, what kind of values they have, and so on, etc. But we also have to look at people who run them, how they are able to put one narrative in front of the users, or in this case governments and institutions that they serve, and what they actually do, how they hide certain things, how they make a lot of money, and so forth. So I would like to see somebody to actually make the work about this investigation that is very inspiring and very thorough. So this is what I wanted to tell you in this 8 minutes, that when you interact with audiences, what we try to do when you focus on what is to create tangible, direct work that somebody can experience and find oneself in this constellation, either through finding their own individual experience or looking at the gatekeepers, the companies, through very different lens that kind of unpacks what they are or they may be, and also to look at technology as a kind of a sphere in which the future is already being decided right now through also the way we interact with it. And if you want to know more about our work, those are all the links and other things, and I will pass on to Sarah.
We do have a moment, Marek, where we can, it's scheduled into the spreadsheet, where we can very briefly speak about your presentation before we move on to Sarah. And I thought it was a wonderful introduction to your work. I find Peter Thiel, the last point, to be a fascinating, in a darkly fascinating individual. His involvement with Facebook and so on, the fact that he studied with René Girard, and he apparently saw the genius in Facebook through the lens of mimetic desire, so they say. Not to mention his work, his funding of sketchy alt-right intellectuals and so on. But I would like to actually just touch very briefly on one point. So the concept of this event in its description has the term digital agency. And I think that it's very interesting in looking at your work as an artist, the way and what you presented to us just now, how agency, when you think about technologies, also can be thought of something that operates below the level of conscious awareness. And there's a concept here that I would like to sort of put forward and just hear what your thoughts are on this. So you mentioned, when you talked about false empowerment, it made me think about a point that a historian who also writes about new media technology recently made. His name is Quinn Slobodian, and he wrote a very interesting review of Shoshana Zuboff's book on surveillance capitalism. And he said in his criticism of her book, he said that the point is that maybe the metaphor of surveillance is not actually the best way to think of these things, but rather, he said, that the term that he used instead of surveillance capitalism was incitement capitalism. So how it is that they kind of incite you to act, and how by inciting you to act with various affordances, they might sort of shape your agency and so on. I was wondering if you might care to reflect on that briefly in relation to the work that you just showed us.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate your question, because, actually 5 minutes before I get on this symposium, I had a kind of long conversation with Stephanie Hanke, with whom I started Tactical Tech, and we developed a lot of curation together and so on. And with this project Pandemic Tech and so on, we really were trying not to use word surveillance, because we find it very limiting. Not that it's not right, not that it's not necessary, not that we have anything against people working. No, this is the opposite. We would still work on that subject, but it is very limiting, especially when you look at where the new technologies are going and where the problems are that need to be solved. And this kind of concept of surveillance, which is one way, this kind of passive, is about observation, is about power control and so on, doesn't really convey what, in our opinion, it is happening. So we try to use other words. That I just used one of them, which is, instead of using data, which is also problematic, because when I think about data, it's kind of an abstraction. You can't really make a relationship between your behavior, your desires, and the data set. It's just it's just some kind of numbers in the spreadsheet and so on. So we were looking at one, of course, everything related to in a way, stimulating behaviors. This is what you're talking about, is for us very important. And that's, we've done a lot of work on, from dark patterns through political influence in elections, different kind of strategies, the use of, different psychological models and so on. But we also try to look at it as maybe the better word to describe what's going on here, and what everybody wants to is some sort of intelligence, but in these two meanings, not only intelligence as a law enforcement, that Peter Thiel would be happy to serve you some intelligence on different things through his Palantir and so on. But also intelligence as we use it in artificial intelligence. Like, there's a kind of a desire and a need and the narratives that are proposing that there will be, that we may have, that we need. And technology will always deliver that. This is what technology is good at, apparently, is to give us enough quality intelligence to be able to solve individual problems, global problems, hyper problems that we can't really comprehend as human beings and so on. So I also don't want to discuss the Shoshana book and so on, but this is where we struggle, actually. This is where you find working with artists and trying to create different interventions, actually quite stimulating to look for new vocabularies and observe how the audiences react to them, what they identify with, what they respond to. Because what we try to do is to exactly do that. We kind of let people step in, not to scare people, not to appear as, paranoid, a bunch of techies that are obsessed with surveillance, which maybe we are.
No, I thank you very much for that response. Actually, I think that the way that the role that concepts play in your own work, the role that they of course play in academia is a very productive overlap, and actually gives me an opportunity to introduce our next speaker. So I'd like to now introduce Sarah, and then we will come back to continue the conversation with Marek. Sarah Grant, in addition to being an artist and the founder of Radical Networks, is also a visiting professor of new media at the Kunstschule in Kassel. She's the founder of the media studio Cosmic.Berlin. She holds a bachelor's degree in the arts and fine arts from UC Davis in California, and an MA in media arts from the interactive ITCP program at NYU. She has also worked as a research fellow at Tao Center for Journalism, an adjunct professor at NYU Polytechnic, and an artist in residence at the IBEAM program, amongst her other accomplishments as an artist. So I would like to now pass the mic to Sarah, after which we will come back for a conversation and involve Marek as well.
Hi, great. Thank you for that introduction. And yeah, it's great to be here with so many great people. And also thanks to Rachel for inviting me to participate on this panel. So I'll just wait. Yep, there's my slides. So yeah, so as mentioned in my introduction just now, I'm a professor of new media at the Kunsthochschule here in Kassel, and a member of Weise Sieben studio in Berlin, which is where I am broadcasting from now. And also, as mentioned, founder of the Radical Networks Conference, which is an event that I started in 2015 that promotes artistic grassroots activists and experimental work in radio and internet, World Wide Web. And I just wanted to reemphasize those roles of mine, because it really influences how I'm framing the points that I want to talk about in the next 8 or 10 minutes. So yeah, the name of the talk is By Nearly Any Means Necessary. So as Marek mentioned, I'm going to kind of touch on the how, like how do artists, stage various interventions. The first panel and then Jillian with her keynote talk did a very, great job at, of course, unpacking like what some of the issues are and yeah, just which issues exist for artists to respond to. And I want to talk a bit more about how we can do it. So, so the first question is, okay, so first of all, I mean, as an artist, when you think about responding to the issues that exist in the technologies and the systems that we engage in and the digital platforms. I mean, I am basically going to share with you the process that I share with my students when helping them sort of get their heads around how to deal with these issues, and also myself as an artist, because it can be very overwhelming to try to figure out how you can deal with, the Facebooks and the Googles and how you can influence laws and policy. So I think it helps to sort of break it down into simple questions. So the first question on my slide is basically asking ourselves, just from the beginning, what is our relationship to technology? Like what is that actually? And then asking ourselves the follow-up question is, what should our relationship be to technology? And I think that's where you start to sort of identify which issues you might want to tackle as an artist. Once you've done that, you now have a choice of approaches. And the way I've broken down these approaches, I mean, you could use different terms, but the point that I want to make is in my mind, there's three different ways artists can stage interventions. One is one I call ethical hacking. You could also call it shock and awe. This is one where, and I'll show examples of works that fall under each of these categories. But ethical hacking might be one where you exploit vulnerabilities in a system and present those back to people in a kind of surprising way that they weren't expecting to find out that they were participants in. Second way is consensual participation. This is an intervention, this might be a work that you make where you give your participants full knowledge and clarity of what they're about to embark on should they engage with your piece. And then the following one called community building is one in which, artistic interventions that are doing just like what the title says, trying to build community and new publics parallel to the general public. So examples of this. So the first one, which I think would fall under this category of ethical hacking, is one by Julian Oliver and Danya Vasiliev, who are two members of Weise Sieben, called Prism, the Beacon Frame, which they produced in 2014. So the way that I also want to frame each of these works that I show is as such. I want to provide the context which motivated these works and then the approach that was taken. So the context for this work is in 2013, Edward Snowden leaked the existence of the NSA Prism program, who warned of the extent, he warned of the extent of mass data, that the extent of mass data collection was far greater by the NSA than the public knew, and included what he characterized as dangerous and criminal activities. Prism collects stored internet communications based on demands made to internet companies such as Google, social media platforms, etc., and they had to turn over any data that matched court-approved search terms. So this was a huge revelation, which had many ramifications, which I think we all have, we all know about by now. So, given this as the motivation for this piece, their approach was to provide the public direct contact with the aesthetics, technology, and strategies used by states, such as the NSA coming from the US, against their publics. So this piece was installed at Transmediale, which is a digital arts festival here in Berlin. And these are just some images from that installation. And on the opening night of Transmediale, after they installed this work, this project, the Beacon Frame, successfully hijacked the cellular connections of at least 740 phones without any interaction from users. And this screen I'm showing right now shows an example of the kinds of text messages that 740 people here at the opening suddenly received. So this project employs the same techniques of wireless Wi-Fi device localization and mapping, cell tower hijacking, and wireless packet inspection, known to be in use by state-sanctioned surveillance agencies such as the NSA out of the States and the GCHQ out of the UK. So when activated, basically, the computer that's part of the project scans for local cell towers owned by mobile service providers like Vodafone, O2, AT&T, and so on, and builds a list of unique properties. The Prism then would begin to rotate, and one by one, each cell provider is impersonated by the Prism tower, by the installation, and this activated mobile phones in the presence of the tower to go onto the rogue network, recognizing it and believing it to be trustworthy. So how is this piece impactful? Well, what happened was it triggered a massive panic, basically, at the opening. The piece was shut down. There were threats of calling the German federal guards on the artists, and all kinds of threats were made. And the takedown ended up being covered by the Spiegel, Motherboard, Vice, Rhizome, and other international outlets. So as one approach for artists who want to stage interventions, this is one in which could definitely carries with it a high amount of risk in that, as an artist, you could be liable for all kinds of legal troubles, but definitely gets the message across, and also has obviously a high chance of being picked up in the media. So the other approach that I mentioned, I think I have one more image though of this piece where you can see, one moment, my clicker is reconnecting. Okay, there we go. So there's one more image that shows sort of the guts of this piece. Okay, consensual participation is the next approach I wanted to talk about. So there is a brand new piece that just came out from Danya. He actually just showed it in Moscow last week called Wanna Scry. So the context for this is the pandemic, basically. So during these pandemic times, we've all been required to move our lives online and to participate in platforms that, unsurprisingly, are vulnerable to surveillance, either by the platform itself or by external actors. Practices of communication, interception, distortion, and manipulation are broadly exercised in cyberspace by means of control and monetization. All the while, the recent increase in usage of video calling services has created an abundance of personal media data, which becomes an easy and desirable target. Privacy negligence, like in the example of Zoom links, which took place intentionally or not, may expose users' most private biometric information to data harvesters and those like them. So Danya's approach for how to confront that issue was to basically invite people to see for themselves what of themselves can be extracted. So, and the title itself, Wanna Scry, it references remote viewing through a crystal ball, which is the sphere is meant to represent here, which is also known as scrying, which is an extrasensory ability which the internet affords us to a certain extent. So, I mean, in practice, Wanna Scry illustrates a security breach of a video calling service and demonstrates to the public the extent to which personal biometric data can be intercepted and extracted by malicious cyber actors and state agencies. So the way that this piece works is you first join the video chat at a URL that's provided by the artist. You're seeing a screen, well, you're shown this screen, which says in great detail exactly what's going to happen, so you fully kind of know what you're getting into before you join. And once you join, the piece or sort of the software running the piece covertly joins the video chat and then displays the image along with biometric data onto the scrying ball. It analyzes sentiment, it analyzes what you're saying and tries to draw conclusions on what you're feeling. It just tries to extract as much biometric data as possible and then displays this on a wall behind the piece. Okay, so the next approach I want to talk about is community building. So for this, I would like to talk about a project that I'm involved in called Futura Tropica, which was initiated by Juan Pablo Garcia Sosa, and I joined as his collaborator after we met at IBEAM last fall. And we continue to work on this project together now. So the context for Futura Tropica is that existing technologies and networks of support and community in the tropics are disregarded in favor of technologies and technoculture handed down from the north. So this is an issue that we hear about a lot, that there's this digital gap, there's the digital divide, that the global south, needs help connecting and needs technologies basically from the global north or the west, however it's described, to sort of come in and bridge these divides. But that completely disregards the fact, like I mentioned, that technologies exist, like networks of support exist in these places. They don't need to be saved by the so-called north or west. So the approach for this project that we took is building a network, a peer-to-peer network called Futura Tropica, which is an intertropical peer-to-peer network of grassroots local networks that centers lateral and intertropical cultural exchange and communication. So basically, Juan Pablo has many contacts throughout the tropics in Kinshasa, in Bengaluru in India, and in Bogota, where he's from, in Colombia. And these are sort of like, these were the seeds for this network in which we place devices that are running software that we've built, which facilitates this peer-to-peer network connecting those cities. The Futura Tropica project also plays with the narrative of the Wood Wide Web and the way, for example, the way trees and mushrooms are interconnected and communicate with each other and redistribute nutrients with the help of fungi as mycelium. Only we're extending this we're taking this metaphor and thinking of the peer-to-peer networking to be this mycelium. So technically, specifically, it uses the interplanetary file system, IPFS protocol, to connect rhizomes in the cities that I mentioned, Bogota, Kinshasa, and Bengaluru. And each rhizome is composed of a DIY local network in combination with a USB-based distribution system. So, I mean, our goal with this project is to open up space for narratives and for worlds that exist in the margins by intersecting already existing networks of support and affection with unconventional uses of network infrastructure. I think I had a couple more slides. Oh, yeah, it's just some images from the locations. So anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to sort of show these first few, these few pieces that illustrate what I think are these three main approaches that artists can take in staging interventions. And I'd love to have questions if there are any now, or go into conversation with Marek. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That was wonderful. The way that you broke that up into those three categories, really helpful and really interesting. I noticed some themes there of a desire for autonomy, but also in your own work, in the third category, the idea of not just autonomy, but also attachment, what you called existing networks of support. And I think that that's really interesting and important in activist work. And so I really appreciate that, the idea that it's not just about autonomy. I wanted to very briefly, if I might, ask you a question on, since there's these concepts in the air, attachment or autonomy and so forth. Since you are both an artist and have also done, seems, a fair bit of work within the kind of academy, if you might reflect a little bit on the role of ideas from philosophy and the humanities in your practice or in the artistic practices that you're interested in, and maybe more generally, how can academics learn from and or support ideas? Excuse me.
I mean, I think
the last word was supposed to be artists. How can academics support artists? Academics spend enough time supporting ideas. How can
yeah. I mean, so my experience in academia, comes from working with, specifically, obviously, within art departments and also as a practicing artist. So, I mean, I would say that it's, I think the most important thing is to not just talk about things and ideas, but to actually, make things and do things. And if you aren't one who would consider yourself an artist and isn't maybe so active in like actually making things yourself, I mean, I think it's really important in academia that we, well, then I would bring in guest speakers or artists or just practitioners from the outside who can actually come in and bring their practice to show the students. Because one thing about academia, which has always been a problem, is that it is in itself an ivory tower and a bit of a like it can be like a walled garden where you can talk about things and talk and talk and talk and be really ideal and suppose that maybe things could work this way or that way. But I think the most important thing as an artist, and especially when you're talking about ideas that have to do with activism and social justice, is that, and just being critical of systems, is that you have to actually demonstrate those vulnerabilities and demonstrate how, what kinds of interventions could actually be changed. So I don't know if I'm really asking your question in the most direct way, but I just think it's really important for academia to connect to the real world, I guess is what I'm trying to say at the end of the day, and not just talk about things, but also either be practicing artists themselves or bring in practicing artists to give students that exposure.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I think that's like a great way of answering that question, actually. Okay. So maybe then this is the time to bring in Marek and have a conversation between involving the two of you. And I will see if we have any questions that the audience have put in here. I do think that I'm told there are, though I don't see exactly where. So in the meantime, as that is put in place, I do actually have some questions for you guys myself. So I'd like to sort of ask a little bit of a provocative question. Why not? So there's we were talking before about academics and the sort of abstract ideas and being sort of stuck in the ivory tower and stuff. So there's one academic that he's a philosopher. His name is Bernard Stiegler. He passed away last year. He's really a complex philosopher who deals with all kinds of stuff like Derrida, and he writes in an almost impenetrable way. But he's one of the few philosophers who actually really dealt in a very direct way with new media technologies in his philosophy. And he had this concept of he took this concept from Derrida. It's a very old concept in philosophy of the pharmakon, which he used to think about technology, how it is that technology can be both a poison and also an antidote, depending on how it is that you use it. And I feel like that metaphor is quite a useful metaphor in the context of the conversation that's going on here. We're talking about platform capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, that a lot of the technologies that are being critiqued are being used in different ways to create alternative visions. Now, my question then is, how do artists kind of guard against that? There's a long tradition in capitalism of capitalism sort of incorporating innovations, especially in new media technology, very idealistic visions of, for example, appropriate technologies from the 1970s, which then got kind of like eaten and turned essentially into the early days of Silicon Valley. Wherever you stand on that politically, I think it's a fair enough point to characterization, just more or less descriptive. The question then is about how does one, if one is perhaps critical of that or opposed to these big Silicon Valley companies, how does one sort of guard against that kind of process? And I can put it in much more straightforward terms, actually, if necessary, but I'm also happy if you answer it in the more abstract sense. The more straightforward terms would be like, would you have any inherent objections if a Silicon Valley company came along with maybe one of their philanthropic arms and said, I really like what you're doing. I want to support this stuff that you're doing, detox or whatever, so that we can get a better image for ourselves. So that's my kind of provocative question. There's different ways you can answer it on more abstract or specific levels if you guys like.
Well, maybe I'll answer that one first quickly. So I've thought about this question before, just because I'm running a conference where we never really have any budget, and just because of the nature of the conference, Actually, not even just for the conference, just for myself personally, I would not take money from Facebook or Google, for example. I mean, I just couldn't. And it's not just to be this like annoying idealist. I mean, it's just that it would completely like undermine like the point or the message of the work that I'm trying to do, either personally or that Radical Networks was established to promote. I mean, another side to that question is like, would it bother me? Because I've been asked this before, actually. Before embarking on like a project or a residency, like, would it bother you if like some corporations in Silicon Valley, sort of took the work that you're doing, since everything you're doing is open source, and then appropriated it for their own platform? And to that, my answer is no, it doesn't bother. I mean, it's fine. Like, my work is open for that reason. Anyone can make use of it. But in terms of actually getting direct support or funding, I personally wouldn't take it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, okay, that's wonderful. Aren't there ways with the various licenses that you can sort of prevent it from being used in a way that you wouldn't appreciate as well?
Yeah.
I did actually.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The question, also, I would put it to Marek if you like. We also do have a question from Aryan that would, at one point, will come in. But first, I'd like to give you the opportunity, if you like, Marek.
Thank you. I like Sarah's answer. I'm going to start from the pharmacon, because that's a very important concept, actually, that we're not using because it's unpenetrable. It's a difficult word. And we try to avoid actually introducing different kinds of words into the narratives that we cover. But the substance of it, which is that one thing can be its own opposite. So as you used, the medicine and the poison, if you like, and so forth. What we all often try to do is to exactly kind of present topics and issues in a fairly ambivalent way. But provocative enough that we try to create this conflict within the audience themselves, where they have to question themselves, because normally we don't have time to question ourselves. And that's kind of important moment to capture. And exactly what we try to often do is to realize that the technology I show you, for example, in the presentation, genuinely can be used to help people remotely that are incapable of taking care of themselves, and you as the carer who is not able to travel anymore would benefit from being able to do that through technology remotely. And I can imagine tens of scenarios when I would buy into that. On the other hand, I'm also imagining instantly the consequences of that, where the subject have no agency, that the observed there's no consensus even on what is and how it is collected. And in this whole scenario, what is important for us to show that there's always third party in this situation. At least third party is the company that is serving it with certain designs, and it's a different dashboard for you, different dashboard for the subject, and a very different dashboard that they have for accumulation of data and so forth. And try to kind of start to imagining 3D these constellations, knowing that the same thing that is you may say, according to my values, it's bad, horrible in the certain circumstances, and often the circumstances are being presented to us because we have COVID, because we go all gonna die. We have to kind of suspend certain things to be able to collect all information possible, because if we have all the information, we're gonna solve the problems, right? And it's hard not to say yes, especially if this is not kind of directly, explicitly shown to you. It's kind of often under other things that you care about and so forth. And the question about the collaborations and money and so forth, when we have a very clear strategy here and very clear value system, so Tactical Tech wouldn't take money from corporations, especially dealing with data and so forth. Would we do work for them, advise them? Of course, we would. Like our work is there to be consumed by anybody, and we don't distinguish. This is only for this people. It's like it's there. It's on free license. Anybody can do whatever they want to do with it. and so forth. And it's very important for us to also be able to be in these spaces as well and talk to these people. We don't want to have silos, etc. We want to try kind of bring them together. People who design this technology also have families, have other problems, and they need this kind of way.
That's wonderful, Marek. I see that Arjen has joined us. Before we give the mic to Arjen, I just would like to kind of try to summarize and reframe the two answers that you given for the audience, and especially for artists who may be watching. I understand the answers. I mean, they're much more involved than this, but I understand the answers as being, you sort of have to figure out your ethical position ahead of time, where you stand on these things before you get kind of confronted with these things. And also the kind of point that art doesn't necessarily have to like tell people through ideas how to think about stuff, but it can be very effective, borrowing the frame that Sarah used in her presentation, this idea of consensual participation, where you can arrive at that kind of conclusion yourself through engaging with the work, rather than being told, this is how the world works and stuff. So yeah, I feel those are really useful points for artists themselves to think about in terms of their own work. So I'd like to now pass the mic to Arjen, who has joined us.
Yeah, thanks. I hope my audio works. Can you hear me? Apparently not.
No, it's good.
Yes, we do.
No, I can hear you.
Okay,
we hear you.
Okay, sorry. Maybe I've got two questions. I'll try to wrap them into one. One is about the audiences that you're addressing, and if that maybe changes the way you communicate the projects, the content. I think Tactical Tech is also doing projects that are more for younger kids, youth schools, etc. Younger audiences. Sarah, you gave this example of community building, which I can imagine that you also have to explain these technological issues to people that are not that informed yet, or for who it's not like common knowledge. So, and some of the examples and projects that have been presented by both of you are quite abstract, that require maybe a lot of prior knowledge to understand them. And if we look at art and how art can inspire this discussion of digital agency, would you, or are you already like doing some projects in more accessible formats just to reach wider audiences or younger audience and to inform them? Can you maybe talk a bit about these different modes that you maybe can work in? And also, I would be curious to hear about, are you actually talking to politicians to inform them? I think, Marek, you told us that you're sometimes being consulted or are consulted to politicians that want to inform themselves. How do you see the dialogue between the arts, or you, and politics? Are you satisfied with how that is going now, or what could improve? And maybe also, Sarah, you could respond to that from your perspective.
Shall I go first? So first of all, when we invited to the meetings with policymakers, we not invited there as artists or creative kind of agency in some sort. We invited there as experts. Part of our expertise that we turn into kind of more I would say artistic practices is a hardcore technological knowledge about how things work, how they created and so forth, and that's what they're seeking from us. It's not the kind of artistic output that we produce. Sometimes it happens that some of the people who have some influence come into these places, and through the language that we use, they gain better understanding and so forth. But I would separate these things. I don't see a situation where an artist comes into the table with the policymaker and is like, "This is my work. Look at it," and they look at the work and they're like, "Holy shoot, now we have to change some policies," and they go and change policies. It doesn't happen like this. I think our mode of operation is more engaging as wider as possible audience, and through audience then either mobilization, organization, or how they vote, policies are being influenced. So there's a longer way, and Sarah can talk about it, more. With the young people, thanks for the shout out here. We actually have a project, What the Future Wants, that we're developing right now that is addressing younger generation 12 to 16, which is often kind of, neglected because they are exactly at owning first devices and they navigate the space for the first time in their life. And people who are involved, parents, teachers, etc., do not really have apparatus to be able to talk to them about all the issues that are there in different ways. And so we work with a lot of groups of young people to kind of design this project that they would not find patronizing, they would not find, complicated, too boring, and so forth, etc. We'll see what's going to come out of that. Thanks.
Yeah, and well, just to echo what Marek said, I mean, I as well, like, I feel like it's not useful as an artist to sort of set out to think that you're going to have an encounter with a politician or legislator and that you're, going to actually directly influence law. I think that that's one way to get really frustrated and disillusioned with your practice. If you're making all this important, work that you think is really important, but it's like somehow not having the effect or the reach, or you're not, you're not getting, you're not having that direct influence on politics as you would like. I think that what's much more important to focus on as an artist is just on your local community, just on what you can and who you can affect, like local to you, who you actually have access to right now today. And that's what I think all the projects I was showing, that's what they do. Like every single project was about interacting. Well, the first two projects, the Beacon Frame and One to Scry, are about interacting with the audience right there in the vicinity of the work. And Futura Tropica is about creating like a new public, a counter public for people of the tropics to create a network and internet basically by and for the people of the tropics, like that's centering tropical culture. So, and I think that if you do this, if you build up new communities, new publics, even just by influencing people who happen to see your work at an exhibition, I think it's by slowly and consistently building a critical mass, or influencing, or just helping people like understand what the issues are and how they actually can directly affect them and what they can do about it. That's how you actually have an opportunity or a chance at all to affect policy and law. And the last thing I wanted to say is, in terms of like, some of the works, I mean, certainly the works that I'm involved in and that people that I know are involved in can be very technical in nature and maybe intimidating and difficult for average person, to come and sort of walk in and understand. Admittedly, it's hard to show these works in just a few minutes and a few slides. I mean, when you are in the room with the works, directly engaging with them, seeing your data being pulled out of your phone, you understand very well what's going on. It's much easier to engage and understand. But to further answer the question, that's one of the things that's really important for me with Radical Networks, is to not just have an exhibition, which we do, or speakers. We also have workshops that are designed to allow people from the public to come in and have a chance working with software-defined radio, or how to make their own local area network, how to like send stuff over. We basically give them the opportunity to interact with these admittedly intimidating technologies to show that, you don't have to know that much to actually begin to build your own infrastructures, your own networks, maybe even your own tools, if you're so inspired to do so. So, so that's what I say about those things.
That is a very, I think that's a very positive note to end on. I was going to ask you a question about what happens when trolls come in and use the artwork in the wrong way. But I think that this is actually perhaps a much more productive point to end on. I really want to thank you guys for inspiring talks and inspiring answers to the questions. I do think that the work that you guys have done over the course of your careers, it was really obviously informs your perspective, and I think it'll be very useful to the folks that this initiative has been set up for. So I would like to thank you guys for the time that you've put into that end. And I believe then that we are now at a point where we'll pause this for now. So thanks for now, and to the viewers at home as well. See you later. Nice to meet you guys too.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.